When Rebecca Walker walked into Beverly Hills' most exclusive boutique wearing simple jeans and a casual blouse, she expected nothing more than a quiet afternoon of browsing. What she didn't expect was to be followed, judged, and humiliated by a salesman who decided her appearance meant she didn't belong among the designer labels and crystal chandeliers, his condescending smirk, his barely hidden contempt, his assumption that someone dressed like her couldn't possibly afford the $15,000 handbag she was admiring. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman he was dismissing was Paul Walker's wife. And when Paul showed up 20 minutes later, what happened next would expose not just one man's cruelty, but reveal a truth about character that no price tag could ever measure. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The afternoon sun blazed over Rodeo Drive, turning the Beverly Hills pavement into a river of heat and light. Luxury cars glided past, Maseratis, Bentleys, the occasional vintage Porsche, each one a mobile statement of wealth. Tourists clustered outside storefronts they'd never enter, snapping photos of window displays featuring dresses that cost more than most people's. Monthly rent inside Maison Elegance, one of the street's most prestigious boutiques. The air was cool and perfumed with something expensive and floral. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, so polished they reflected like mirrors. Racks of designer clothing, each piece hand-selected from Paris, Milan, New York, lined the walls like artwork in a gallery. Everything about the space whispered exclusivity. Behind the main counter stood Marcus Thornton, 36 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly, his Italian leather shoes polished to an almost offensive shine. He wore his position like armor. Senior sales consultant at Maison Elegance wasn't just a job, it was an identity. Marcus had worked his way up from nothing, born in a small Nevada town to parents who could barely make rent. He'd clawed his way to Beverly Hills through sheer determination and an obsessive attention to detail. He knew every designer label, every fashion trend, every subtle signal that separated the truly wealthy from the pretenders. And he had learned one crucial skill: how to read people the moment they walked through the door. The glass doors opened with a soft chime. Rebecca Walker stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the boutique's soft lighting. She wore faded Levi's with a small paint stain near the knee. She'd been helping at the animal shelter that morning, a cream-colored blouse from a regular department store, and comfortable flats. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a worn leather purse that had seen years of use, but was loved for its comfort, not its label. She looked like someone who had just finished running errands, which, in fact, she had. Rebecca smiled at the receptionist near the entrance, who returned it politely but with a flicker of something else. Assessment, maybe concern. Before glancing down at her computer screen, Marcus noticed her immediately. His eyes traveled from her scuffed flats to her faded jeans to her simple blouse. No Hermes bag, no Cartier watch, no designer sunglasses perched on her head, nothing that screamed money. Marcus leaned toward his colleague, Diana, a younger woman arranging a display case of silk scarves nearby. His voice was low but not quite low enough. "Another tourist," he murmured, a slight smirk playing at his lips. "Probably thinks she can afford something here." Diana glanced up, uncomfortable. "Marcus, she just walked in." "Trust me," Marcus interrupted, his tone dripping with certainty. "I've been doing this long enough. She'll look around, touch maybe one or two things, then leave when she sees the prices." Rebecca, oblivious to the conversation, moved slowly through the store. Her eyes were drawn to a window display featuring an elegant collection of handbags, structured leather pieces in rich burgundies and deep blacks. One caught her attention, a medium-sized bag with clean lines and minimal hardware. It wasn't the flashiest piece in the store, but it was beautiful, timeless. She leaned closer, admiring the craftsmanship. The stitching was immaculate. The leather butter soft. Marcus approached, his footsteps deliberate against the marble floor. His smile was professional, but cold, like a doctor delivering bad news with practiced empathy. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something condescending. "Can I help you find something specific?" Rebecca looked up, offering a genuine smile. "Hi, yes? I was looking at this bag, could I see it?" Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then he glanced at the discreet price tag displayed beside the piece, $15,800. He looked back at Rebecca, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Of course," he said slowly, as if choosing his words very carefully. "Though I should mention, that particular piece is part of our premium collection. It's quite exclusive." Rebecca blinked, sensing the shift in his tone. "I understand. I'd still like to see it." Marcus didn't move immediately. Instead, he crossed his arms slightly, his posture shifting from professional to guarded. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be presumptuous," he said, his voice dropping just enough to feel patronizing. "But this bag is nearly $16,000. I just want to make sure we're on the same page before I take it out of the case." The words landed like a slap. Rebecca stood very still, her smile fading. "I'm sorry?" Marcus maintained his fake politeness, that smile that wasn't really a smile. "I'm simply being transparent about the price. We've had situations where customers weren't aware of the cost, and it creates awkwardness for everyone involved." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "I can read the price tag." Marcus raised his eyebrows slightly as if surprised by her response. "Of course. I just wanted to ensure there were no misunderstandings." He made no move to unlock the case. Rebecca took a slow breath, trying to remain calm. Her morning had been good, playing with rescue dogs, helping clean kennels, feeling useful. She hadn't expected this. "So are you going to show me the bag or not?" Marcus glanced around the store, as if looking for support. Diana, standing nearby, averted her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. "Ma'am?" Marcus said, his tone now openly patronizing. "I think it would be better if I showed you our more accessible pieces. We have a lovely selection over here." He gestured toward a different case, one filled with significantly less expensive items, small wallets, keychains, things tourists bought. Rebecca's hands clenched at her sides. "I asked to see that bag." Marcus sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "Look, I've been working here for 10 years. I can tell when someone is serious about making a purchase and when someone is just window shopping, and, frankly," he gestured vaguely at her appearance, "I don't think this is the right fit for you." The air in the store seemed to freeze. Rebecca stared at him, her voice low but steady. "You don't think it's the right fit for me?" Marcus's mask slipped just slightly, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm trying to be helpful here. These bags aren't for everyone. They're investment pieces for a very specific clientele. And you've decided I'm not part of that clientele based on what exactly?" Rebecca's voice was quiet, dangerous. Marcus didn't answer directly. He simply gestured vaguely at her jeans, her blouse, her worn purse. His meaning was unmistakable. The silence that followed was suffocating. Diana, standing a few feet away, finally spoke up, her voice hesitant. "Marcus, maybe we should just—" Marcus cut her off with a sharp look. Then he turned back to Rebecca, his professional mask back in place but his eyes cold. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but this is a high-end establishment. We cater to a very specific clientele. If you're not comfortable with our price points, perhaps another store would be more suitable." Rebecca stood frozen, humiliation washing over her. Not because she couldn't afford the bag. She and Paul could buy the entire store without blinking, but because this man had judged her, dismissed her, and insulted her based solely on how she looked. And the worst part? He didn't even realize what he'd done wrong. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. She wanted to leave, to walk out with whatever dignity she had left, but something inside her refused to let this go. "I'd like to speak to the manager," she said, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. Marcus's expression didn't change. "I am the senior sales consultant. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to leave feedback on our website." Rebecca stared at him, disbelief mixing with fury. This man wasn't just dismissive, he was cruel, and he was doing it with a smile. Before she could respond, the glass doors opened again with a soft chime. Paul Walker stepped inside. He wore his usual casual style, faded jeans, a gray Henley shirt, and his favorite worn-out Vans. His hair was slightly tousled, his face unshaven. He looked like he'd just come from working on a car in his garage, which he had. Paul's eyes immediately found Rebecca across the store. He smiled, raising a hand in greeting, but the moment he saw her expression, tense, hurt, angry, his smile vanished. He crossed the store in quick strides, his presence commanding attention without him saying a word. "Beck?" Paul's voice was gentle but concerned. "Everything okay?" Rebecca looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears she refused to let fall. "I'm fine." Paul studied her face for a moment. He knew every expression, every micro-emotion she tried to hide. Then he turned to Marcus, who stood frozen, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning recognition. "Is there a problem here?" Paul asked, his tone calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "No problem at all, sir. I was just explaining to your friend our store policies." Paul's eyes narrowed. "Friend?" Marcus blinked. I assumed. "She's my wife," Paul said quietly, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast it was almost comical. He looked from Paul to Rebecca, then back to Paul, his brain clearly short-circuiting. Paul looked at Rebecca again, his jaw tight. "What happened?" Rebecca hesitated, glancing at Marcus, who now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "He wouldn't show me a bag," she said softly. "Said it wasn't the right fit for me, that I should look at something more accessible." Paul's expression darkened. He turned slowly to Marcus, who stood rooted to the spot, suddenly finding the marble floor very interesting. "Not the right fit," Paul repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "Based on what?" Marcus stammered, his professionalism crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. "Sir, I didn't mean, I was just trying to—" Paul stepped closer, his voice dropping but somehow becoming more commanding. "You looked at my wife and decided she didn't belong here. You judged her based on her clothes and you treated her like she was nothing." Marcus's hands trembled. "Mr. Walker, I apologize. I didn't know." Paul cut him off. "You didn't know who she was. And that's exactly the problem." He gestured toward Rebecca. "My wife could buy everything in this store without thinking twice, but you didn't see that. You saw jeans and flats, and you decided she wasn't worth your time." The store had gone completely silent. Diana stood off to the side, her eyes wide. Other customers had paused, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and approval. Paul's voice softened, but it carried even more weight. "You don't know people's stories, Marcus. You don't know what they've been through, what they've built, or what they're capable of. All you saw was surface, and that says everything about you and nothing about her." Marcus looked like he might be sick. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Walker. I made a terrible mistake." Rebecca finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't make a mistake. You showed me exactly who you are." Paul looked at Marcus one last time, his expression unreadable. "I want to speak to the owner, now." Marcus's face went pale. "Sir, the owner isn't here today." Paul pulled out his phone. "Then get them on the phone." Marcus fumbled for his own phone, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. But Paul wasn't done, because what Marcus didn't know, what he was about to learn, was that Paul Walker didn't just shop at Maison Elegance. He owned the building it was in, and in the next 20 minutes, Marcus Thornton's entire world would collapse. Not because Paul was cruel, but because some lessons can't be taught with words alone. Marcus's hands shook as he dialed the owner's number, his mind racing to calculate how much damage control he'd need. This was Paul Walker, actor, philanthropist, someone whose name carried immense weight. Marcus had insulted his wife publicly, in front of witnesses, and now he was standing in the middle of the boutique with nowhere to hide. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Margot Beaumont?" Marcus cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mrs. Beaumont, this is Marcus Thornton at the Rodeo Drive location. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." There was a pause. "What kind of situation?" Marcus glanced at Paul, who stood with his arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was calm but unyielding. "There's been a customer complaint," Marcus said carefully. "A serious one involving Paul Walker and his wife." Another pause, longer this time when Margot spoke again. Her voice had shifted, sharper, more alert. "Paul Walker? The actor?" "Yes, ma'am." "Put him on the phone now." Marcus held out the phone toward Paul with a trembling hand. "She wants to speak with you, sir." Paul took the phone, his expression unchanging. "Miss Beaumont." Margot's voice was immediately warmer, almost deferential. "Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry for whatever happened. Can you tell me what's going on?" Paul's tone remained calm but carried unmistakable authority. "Your senior sales consultant just humiliated my wife because she didn't look wealthy enough to shop here. He refused to show her a handbag, told her it wasn't the right fit, and suggested she look at cheaper items. When she asked for a manager, he dismissed her." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh my God, Mr. Walker, I am so deeply sorry." "I'm not finished," Paul said quietly. "When I arrived, he made assumptions about who she was to me. And even after learning she's my wife, his apology was about not recognizing me, not about how he treated her." The line was silent for a moment, then Margot's voice came through ice cold and final. "Put Marcus back on." Paul handed the phone back to Marcus, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Marcus," Margot's voice came through the line, clipped and furious. "You're done. Clear out your desk. Security will escort you out." Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "Ms. Beaumont, please. I've been with you for 10 years, and in 10 seconds you destroyed everything this company stands for. You're fired. Effective immediately." The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. Around him, the store was completely silent. Diana wouldn't meet his eyes. The other customers stared, some with satisfaction, others with pity. Even the chandelier seemed to dim. Paul turned to Rebecca, his voice soft. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. "Yeah, I think so." Paul looked back at Marcus one more time. "I hope you learned something from this about how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you." Marcus could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. As Paul and Rebecca turned to leave, Margot's voice came through the store's speaker system. She must have called the front desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, if you're still there, please wait. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Paul looked at Rebecca. She took a breath, then nodded. They would wait. They sat in leather chairs near the window, while Marcus, moving like a man in a trance, walked to the back office to collect his things. Security, a quiet, professional man named Robert, waited near the entrance. As Marcus returned, carrying a small box with his personal items, he paused in front of Rebecca. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried weight. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught, and you're sorry it was me." Marcus flinched. He had no response. He turned and walked out, Robert following close behind. The doors closed behind them with a soft chime, and the weight in the air seemed to lift slightly. 18 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside Maison Elegance. Margot Beaumont stepped out, a woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Armani suit, her silver hair styled in a sharp bob. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. She entered the store, her eyes immediately finding Paul and Rebecca. She approached them with visible contrition. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," she said, her voice sincere and pained. "I cannot apologize enough for what happened here today." Paul nodded, but didn't speak. He let Rebecca take the lead. Margot turned to her, her expression anguished. "Mrs. Walker, what Marcus did was inexcusable. There is no policy, no training, no circumstance that justifies treating anyone the way you were treated." Rebecca studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity. She found it. "Does this happen often?" Margot hesitated, then answered honestly, "More than I'd like to admit, and that's my failure. I've built a brand focused on luxury and exclusivity, and somewhere along the way, people like Marcus started confusing exclusivity with elitism, with the right to judge." She looked around the boutique, then back at Rebecca. "That ends today," Paul finally spoke. "How?" Margot met his gaze directly. "First, I'm implementing mandatory sensitivity and bias training for every employee in every location. Second, I'm creating an anonymous reporting system so customers who feel mistreated have a voice. And third," she paused, "I'd like to invite you both to be part of a community advisory board. Help us rebuild what we should have been from the beginning." Paul glanced at Rebecca. She considered it, then nodded slowly. "We'll think about it," Paul said. Margot exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, that's more than I deserve." She turned to Diana, who had been standing quietly near the back, clearly shaken by everything. "Diana, come here." Diana approached nervously. Margot's voice was firm but kind. "I'm promoting you to senior sales consultant, effective immediately." Diana's eyes widened. "Ms. Beaumont, you didn't participate in what happened today. You showed discomfort. That's more integrity than most people show. Now I need you to lead by example." Diana nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I will, I promise." Margot turned back to Rebecca. "Now, is there anything I can show you? Anything at all?" Rebecca smiled faintly, glancing at the window display. "Actually, yes, that bag I was looking at." Margot walked to the case, unlocked it with care, and lifted out the burgundy leather handbag. She handed it to Rebecca with reverence, like passing along something sacred. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said softly, running her fingers over the stitching. Paul stepped closer, looking at the bag, then at Rebecca. His voice was gentle. "It's perfect on you." Margot smiled. "It's yours." "No charge." Rebecca looked up, surprised. "That's not necessary." "It is," Margot said firmly. "Consider it the first step in making things right, not the last step. The first." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded, accepting the gesture with grace. "Thank you." As Margot carefully packaged the handbag, Paul leaned in and whispered to Rebecca, "You know what? I want to do one more thing." Rebecca looked at him curiously. Paul turned to Margot. "How much would it cost to buy out your entire current inventory?" Margot blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I'm sorry?" Paul's expression was serious, purposeful. "Every handbag, every piece of clothing, every accessory in this store right now? How much?" Margot stared at him, speechless for a moment. Then, slowly, she calculated. That would be approximately $3 million. Paul didn't hesitate. "Let's make it happen, but not for me." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she realized what he was doing. "I want everything donated," Paul continued, "to women's shelters, community programs, job training centers, organizations that help women who've been told they don't belong, that they're not good enough, that they don't deserve beautiful things." Margot's voice was thick with emotion. "Mr. Walker, that's extraordinary." Paul shook his head. "It's just right." And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the boutique, but in everyone who witnessed it, because Paul Walker had just turned a moment of cruelty into an act of grace that would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond Rodeo Drive. Marcus Thornton, wherever he was now, would carry this lesson for the rest of his life, and Maison Elegance, it would never be the same again. 3 weeks later, Rebecca stood in a community center in East Los Angeles, surrounded by women and teenage girls who had received items from Paul's donation. They weren't wearing the pieces as symbols of wealth, they were wearing them as reminders that they mattered, that they belonged, that someone, somewhere believed they were worth more than the world had told them. A young woman approached Rebecca, tears in her eyes, holding the very bag Rebecca had asked to see that day. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "I've never owned anything this beautiful. I'm wearing it to my first job interview tomorrow." Rebecca's throat tightened. She pulled the woman into a hug. "You're going to do amazing." As Rebecca looked around the room, at women laughing, trying on clothes, taking photos, feeling seen, she realized something Paul had always known. True value isn't found in what you wear or what you own. It's found in how you make others feel. And that's priceless.